They have these Telegram groups filled with people that have specializations. So they'll jump in there and say, hey, I need a support person to come on the phone with me and pretend like, they're Coinbase support to, get this guy to open his wallet or something like that. My advice, because it's counterintuitive to all of them and they disagree with me, but I'm right. Never hold your treasuries in Bitcoin. Do your business in fiat. Otherwise, you will fail. I promise you. And if you don't, you got lucky. It's a little bit of a tenuous proposition, and I generally recommend people don't do it. You'll get scammed. You just will. And if you don't think you will, you're just not a Bitcoiner yet.
This podcast is entertainment, not financial, tax, or legal advice. Views expressed represent statements of the speaker in their individual capacity, do not represent the views of Unchained, and should not be considered investment advice. Speakers often have personal, family, or business connections to Unchained, which may include direct financial benefits. Please see our disclosure at unchained.com/podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bitcoin Frontier podcast. This week we have on Junseth. Junseth, welcome.
Hey, how are you?
Doing great. I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's a good week. Fun Bitcoin week.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For those, I know people probably know who you are if they've been in Bitcoin for a while, but for those that are new, since the price is going up, maybe good to hear like how you first got involved with Bitcoin.
I got involved a week after Pizza Day. I was working in New York. I would have considered myself a political anarchist at the time. I got an email from Harrow to help a reporter out. I was a marketer, so that was something I would comb through. And one of the prompts was like, we're looking for someone who's using Bitcoin. And I remember looking at that and like checking it out, and then ended up in the forum, and then was hooked. It was just kind of like, oh, this is interesting. And to be honest, it's funny because I really didn't know how it worked at all. And it took me years to understand what I was looking at. I just liked the idea of finding a community of other people who were sort of anti-government in the way that I was. So, it's come a long way. I am far less anti-government now than I was, and far more of a statist cuck, I think is the word Bitcoiners use to describe us, statist cucks. But yeah, I think, I still strongly believe in Bitcoin, always have. Me and Chris, my co-host at the time, we launched a podcast many years ago called Bitcoin Uncensored, which became probably the most popular Bitcoin podcast, certainly the most memorable one. And we have a lot of fun legacy things like Bitcoin. The term Bitcoin maximalist comes from an article that Vitalik wrote after he had a big argument with us. Really it was an article about how big of assholes we were. So we like to claim the term Bitcoin maximalist is being first applied to us before anybody else, which I think is fun. But there's a number of things like that. I've just been around a long time, watching Bitcoin, doing Bitcoin things, speaking at Bitcoin conferences, doing podcasts, and more recently doing nothing, just kind of hanging out and being married and having a kid. So, things are fun. Life is life. Let's moving on.
I love it. Yeah. Congrats on the kid. That's awesome.
Thank you.
I have noticed,
I don't think it's the same to her though.
Fair enough. No, I doubt that. But I have kind of noticed,
Congrats on the dad.
Over the years, like there have been more and more people, I guess, within the Bitcoin space have kind of like, a lot of us did have like that libertarian mindset, when we maybe first understood Bitcoin or first began to grok Bitcoin. But over time, it seems like more and more people are recognizing that, government is a thing that exists and it's probably here to stay to some extent. Why do you think that is over time? You had that same idea.
Well, I think libertarianism is an interesting idea when you first encounter it. It's because it's like a new food. You've never heard these ideas before. It's really easy to accept them as true. You eat them, you put them in your brain. And then if you have them in your brain long enough, you start to think about how stupid most of them are and how libertarians have sort of overshot the goal. They have sort of the right idea, the wrong conclusion, if you will. They have this notion of freedom, but they don't have this understanding of what causes and creates freedom and the role of government, which is really the management of externalities and to make sure that like libertarian type thinking can be somewhat reined in. Ultimate freedom has interestingly, ultimate freedom has some reins. And, otherwise you end up in like a barbarian culture where everyone's murdering each other. So like you have reins either imposed socially or imposed by government. And as you're in Bitcoin among other people who like believe strongly this stuff, you very quickly encounter the consequences of pure libertarianism and the lack of nuance and shallowness of thinking when you hear them speak about their ideas, if you've thought about them for a little bit. But it takes a little bit of time for you to really sort of like work through them. For me, there were like a number of really big moments of change. One of them was I was at a conference that Bruce Fenn put on, or not Bruce Fenn didn't put it on. Jason of like Satoshi Forest, I think back in the day, put it on. It's called Bitcoin, Coins in the Kingdom. It was Bitcoin at Disney. And we went to this. And I remember Bruce Fenn was there, his kid was there. There was lots and lots of Bitcoiners. It was the week that like Mt. Gox, or what Bitcoin I think hit 1,000. There was a lot of glee and happiness right before Mt. Gox failed. And it might have been right after. I think it was right before Mt. Gox failed. And it was, I remember speaking to a libertarian who had one of the biggest libertarian podcasts at the time. And in the middle of this conference, there was this Ponzi scheme. There were Bitcoin, I'm trying to think of the name. It was like trading dash something dot biz. It was like just like this obvious total scam domain. But they were just a clear Ponzi scheme. They were showing like tickers and trades. And like, oh, look at all the trades we're doing on the screen. It was just blinking. And none of them are real trades. This is a classic scam in Bitcoin. And so I decided to sit at the table. This is before anybody knew who I was. We were just running the Bitcoin meetup in the Broward. And I sat there, and as people would walk up to the table, I'd just be like, this is a Ponzi, this is a Ponzi, this is a Ponzi, just saying that it's a Ponzi. And the guy, this guy who's the host of one of these big libertarian podcasts comes up to me afterwards and says, thank you so much for doing that. I was going to give them a lot of money. And it just occurred to me that like these are the guys who think that they're responsible enough to put their money into things and make decisions about their own life, but they're so stupid that they can't see what is an obvious Ponzi scheme right in front of them. And it just made me realize that like these people have to be taken care of in some way in their old age. Otherwise, they'll end up under a bridge eating cats. So like, to me, like if the libertarians who are the most prominent libertarians are too dumb to take care of themselves, it doesn't say a lot for the movement. Those are the best thinkers. That's their best thinker.
Yeah, no, that's definitely fair. And it's, I guess, very related kind of to the experience that you've had talking to the scammers. Like some people, if they're older and they're trying to manage private keys, they haven't been able to maybe successfully distinguish between who they're talking to and whether that's a scammer or someone that's not a scammer.
Yeah, we should get into that. So I've been, one of my favorite things to do in my recent life as an old man is when people call me, like most people, you get those calls. It's like, hey, your car is out of warranty, and send us money and we'll give you another new warranty, like those kind of things. I started getting those calls, but in Bitcoin, it was people calling and saying your Coinbase password's being reset, or someone's trying to log into your account. Is that you? Press 1, stuff like that. I remember the first time I took one of these calls, like, this is weird. Coinbase is calling me, and I get on the phone and I talk to the guy, and he's like very cordial, seems very, very convincingly like a person trying to help me. And it clicked for me. I mean, first of all, I don't, I'm a Bitcoiner. I don't have like anything on Coinbase. So I'm just kind of trying to figure out what the hell's going on with my account. And I'm asking questions and he's answering them, and he's sending emails, like, whatever. And I'm pretty familiar with a lot of these phishing scams. I kind of look at it. I was like, I figure out on the phone that this is a phishing scam. And I say, I'm like, dude, you're a scammer. At which point he starts cussing me out and like screaming at me and talking about my mom, which just seems like the scammers really like to do. Your mom is so stupid. I slept with your mom last night, whatever. So I realized that all these calls I was getting at the same time, there were like some of my accounts were actually, people were trying to access some of them. So I was getting legitimate claims from companies like, whether it's investment accounts or whatever, saying that like my accounts are being hacked, and at the same time, like these scam calls. And I realized I thought it'd be fun to just answer every scam call and see if I could get the scammers to talk. And I did it. I probably answered 200 or 300 calls, and I've gotten 2 or 3 to just sit down and talk to me. And so that, I think that's probably what elicited the request to come on the show initially here.
Yeah, definitely. So you answered 2 or 300 and you talked to 2 or 3, like you're referring
Yeah,
to.
it's a small. Yeah, I got them to spill a little bit more than they should have. Maybe 1% of the calls I get.
For maybe, because I'm sure some people have gone back and listened to them. Like, what did they like for those that haven't already listened to those? Like, what was the key idea behind it, or what did they say?
Well, essentially, these are young kids that are all recruited on Minecraft and Roblox, and they're just pretending to be representatives of the companies that they're calling about, and they try to get you to give them your Bitcoin, basically, by hook or by crook. They'll either walk you through sending it to them, or they'll send it to themselves out of your account if you let them get access to it. So these are, and by the way, what's interesting about discussing with all of these kids is that they really have a video game mentality about this. They don't feel that bad about it. They don't feel like they're doing anything wrong. They kind of feel like if you lost your coins, it's your goddamn fault. So I found this whole thing to be very interesting in terms of sort of just the mentality of the young kids that are doing this, and where they come from, and how sort of insouciant they are about the feelings of the people that they're taking from. It's an interesting apathy that they have, and a willingness to suspend disbelief even in real life that you might have in a video game, which I think speaks to, something about the generation, but also they're really young. They're all like 16, 17, 18, at least they say they are. And that's like, before their prefrontal cortex has even been developed, and they have, like, I think, a really innate sense of morality and ethics. But I find that to be really interesting.
Yeah, it is.
And they're stupid, which is why they talk so much.
Yeah, exactly. It is interesting. And it's like, why do you think that they are doing stuff like this? Like, do you think that the nature of the digital age that we live in, where there's maybe like a lack of connection between typing something on Twitter and having it go out to, thousands of people, is that like the key reason why, or are there other reasons?
I don't know. They don't know you, so they don't care about you. So yeah, I guess that's kind of it. They're able to disconnect themselves from the reality of what they're doing very easily. I think also a lot of them really haven't put much thought into it. They're just kind of like going along to get along, and then all of a sudden they're making $100,000 a year, which to a kid is a lot of money. Like when I was a kid, my dad, my one of my cousins started making $40K a year, and my dad, who made very little money throughout his life, was telling me how amazing it is that she's making $40K out of college. And I think that these, it's sort of a similar mentality to these 16-year-olds. They're making $100K, they're doing criminal activity, and they just think that it's more money than they'll ever make, that anyone could ever make. And so they do it, and they don't feel too bad about it, because, like, a lot of them will brag to me about the charity they do with the money. You and me would think the same thing. It's not your money to do charity with. Like that doesn't make you a good person. So it's interesting. A lot of them have this innate sense that what they're doing is bad, but that if they do good with the thing, with someone else's thing, then somehow they're a good person. And that to me is astounding, that you could delude yourself to that degree.
Yeah, that is like really sad. And I'm thinking back to old high school jobs that I had where I made like $7.20 an hour.
Babysitting, I worked in sugar beet fields. Like, it is what it is. Yeah, you make very little money as a young kid. And it's supposed to set you up for the rest. Whoa. Yeah. This chair is not my chair, it's my wife's. I think she's very bouncy. They're supposed to set you up for a high degree of, like for the future, right? These jobs in high school are supposed to set you up for, learning work ethic and whatnot. And these kids, on the other hand, view these jobs as sort of the end. Like they want to retire in 5 years. And, when you talk to them about how much they need to retire, it's like $2 million, right? And you're kind of sitting there like, okay, like you're not going to be able to retire on that, young Padawan. But it's cute that you think that. And, they're all kind of that way. They want to buy McLarens. Could you imagine having the lifestyle that an 18 or 20-year-old would want without the control, the lack of understanding of how the world works, and only $2 million? Like you'd eat that up in like 4 months. And we saw that actually with those guys that stole like $120 million down in Miami. They were buying Birkin bags for women, and they were basically hiring all these like TikTok girls to come and hang out with them. And it was just an absurd amount of money that they were going through. you can't live that lifestyle and
Yeah.
on $2 million.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy to think about. Do you think this is like, so I guess you've kind of discovered like because obviously phishing is a big thing globally, not just within Bitcoin, but like crypto broadly and probably all sorts of other scams. It seems like you've discovered like this very small niche or subset of the entire like phishing industry. Do you think that this is going to expand? Like maybe not that specific subset, but like phishing in general, like with AI and new technology and just the digital nature of the world now?
Yeah, and crypto allows specialization of phishing. So, one of the interesting things about these groups is that they don't have to be Bitcoin specific, right? They can move from scam to scam. And once they're doing it, like, it's kind of never ending. So, you can do Bitcoin, and they have these Telegram groups filled with people that have specializations. Some of them are callers, others are sort of support. So they'll jump in there and say, hey, I need a support person to come on the phone with me and pretend like, their Coinbase support to, get this guy to open his wallet or something like that. And they'll basically split up any winnings. They'll pay each other any winnings from any of these things. So there's sort of a whole like honor among thieves culture in this group until someone gets enough, and then they do what's called snaking, and they leave and they don't pay anybody. But yeah, like there's an honor among thieves type culture. There's people that are specialized in a practice called bricking, where they'll show up at someone's house and throw a brick through their window with a note on it, make it feel like the person that who called them maybe has a little bit more power and influence and is near you. When they're not really there. But with a little specialized note literally directed to you from the person that threatened you. So, those are interesting. And I think the result of specialization among scammers means that it only increases over time here. I mean, there are scams with support lines, man. These crypto locker softwares, they literally have a support line that you can call in India to help you get your computer unlocked.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. From your perspective, like so much experience, like just being in Bitcoin for so long, how do you think people should protect themselves? Like whether it's an older person or that's bought a lot of Bitcoin or crypto, even crypto broadly, right? Or it's like maybe a younger person that just, isn't like super technology, like isn't familiar with all these phishing scams and isn't ready. Like how should people think about this?
Buy guns. I don't know. Like, look, if you're in Bitcoin and you are interested in protecting yourself, number one, practice good OPSEC. If you're buying homes, don't buy them in places with like very public addresses like Florida, or buy them in LLCs, but you might forego some tax benefits, buy weapons, have them, learn how to use them. Make sure your passwords are really, really secure. Don't store them in like Google Cloud or anything like that. Like there's all sorts of things you can do, but really ultimately, like you can do everything. But a lot of the people that are getting scammed in these scams are logging right into their accounts in spite of all that and handing over their money to these guys. Like these guys aren't going after, they're usually not going to show up at your house and try to kidnap you or your kid or your wife or whatever. More than likely, they're just going to go after the low-hanging fruit of old people who are willing to hand over their keys. And there's a lot of those, a lot. And it's interesting to me because I get called every day by these things. I imagine that if you're on their list, you're getting called every day by these scammers. It's interesting that there are still people on these lists that are too naive to understand what's going on. It surprises me. You'd think they would have gotten 400 calls.
Yeah. I mean, I guess potentially the lists are growing, right? I mean, if Bitcoin's soaring up and people are buying whatever on the internet, and yeah.
I kind of think that a majority of the list is from the Ledger hack. So I don't know exactly where they're getting their names, but I think they're sort of correlating them between like a bunch of hacks. I think the base of it being the Ledger hack, which I don't know how many names they had, 1.2 million or something like that, some absurd number of names. And so that's kind of what I think is happening.
Yeah. And the other thing I guess that's kind of interesting is like a lot of people that are learning about Bitcoin now, like, we always have that saying, don't trust, verify. But as you're learning about Bitcoin, you kind of have to learn about Bitcoin from someone else or like a book or a podcast or whatnot. So it's like you kind of have to trust a little bit to even like begin to be interested in this at all. So it's kind of a weird situation where, well, who do you trust to get started, and like how do you make the right decision, and like how do you actually learn about this stuff from
I think
experts?
I think investing is really hard. That's why the ETFs exist for most people. If you're a person who knows how Fidelity works and knows essentially what an ETF is, that makes like investing in Bitcoin really easy. And really everyone has different threat vectors, right? If your threat vector is that you think the government is going to confiscate your wealth, then holding an ETF doesn't make any sense. If your threat vector is that you believe that thieves are going to steal your wealth, which is way more likely, your threat vector is very different. And if you're just someone who wants to profit on crypto or Bitcoin or whatever it is, like your threat vector is very different as well. So, there's a lot of different reasons that people invest. I think if you're going to be buying raw Bitcoin, I think you need to spend 3 to 4 years understanding it before you make your first purchase. And that's just because I think, or maybe make small purchases. The consequences of putting it into like a Coinbase or a Gemini or any exchange really are that eventually time runs out for those things, and either they get hacked or you get hacked. You're not going to be, especially if you're not a cryptographer or a person who's dedicated themselves to really having good OPSEC, you're not going to have good enough OPSEC for large amounts of money. Bitcoin is raw. It's like having gold. It's like sitting the gold in your house and telling people about it. Like it's there. It's obvious. It's it's very difficult, I think, for people to hide. So you have to consider what it is that you're buying. And I think that if you're buying it without knowing what it is, which is what most people do, it's a little bit of a tenuous proposition. And I generally recommend people don't do it. You'll get scammed. You just will. And if you don't think you will, you're just not a Bitcoiner yet.
So would you say, are you bearish on the idea of self-custody, like in general, for like the next decade?
Well, what is define bearish on self-custody? Because like I don't have a position on whether someone should or shouldn't self-custody, or whether the number of people self-custodying is good or bad. I don't actually care if people self-custody. I think that you as an individual, when you're making an assessment about your investments, you need to assess what your threat vector is, or not just threat vector, but like your investment model. If your investment model is to make a quick buck, that's a very different one than I'm trying to hedge against the government, right? And all of these things are sort of stochastic probabilities. What are the chances that the government goes bad and confiscates everything you own? Maybe it's 1%, right? So then maybe you take 1% of your money and you put it into like unconfiscatable assets, right? It depends. You really have to think hard about what it is that you are trying to guard against or trying to gain when you make any investments at all. And there's a reason for that, because you need to be like, I talk about this a lot. Like I spend a lot of time in Clubhouse with like a bunch of Bitcoiners. I talk about position sizing regularly in your portfolio. Position sizing matters. And that position sizing is questions about like, what is the goal of this portfolio? Is it just to return a buck, or is this portfolio meant to be around in 1,000 years? Or is this portfolio meant to prevent the government from taking my stuff? Like, what is it? And there's ways that with Bitcoin, the beauty is you can construct a portfolio to do any of those things. But it doesn't mean that like a person who has Bitcoin has to have 100% of their Bitcoin in raw Bitcoin. It really depends on what your ultimate goals are. And if, for example, you know really well how to hold Bitcoin, or for example, there are products that are coming out on the market, good insurance products. When I invested in one called Anchor Watch, they're getting ready to launch. As these products come out, you can actually sort of calculate the risk of being a hodler, right? What is the risk? Okay, they charge 1% per year or something like that to make sure that you don't lose your Bitcoin. So if I am a person who's gonna choose between holding my own Bitcoin or like let's say insuring it, or not insuring it, or buying an ETF, I'm going to be doing the math. Like the ETF, let's say Fidelity, I think it's 0.2 or 0.02%. That's the cost of me using that. the cost of me holding it myself, the potential loss of the Bitcoin is X percent. You can very quickly figure out whether you should be holding your own Bitcoin or whether you should let someone else hold it. It's a cost function.
Yeah, the ETFs are interesting because like I see them as like top of funnel marketing personally, I guess, for Bitcoin to at the very least. And then also it's like there is, I still think like somewhat of a problem of like if the Bitcoin for IBIT, for example, is custodied at Coinbase, and it's kind of like you're not only trusting BlackRock, but you're trusting Coinbase and you're trusting that all of these people in the middle, like, don't get phished themselves. Because I guess even internal employees at companies, can be subject to phishing scams, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And that's the risk you're taking. You could index that by like buying all of the ETFs if you wanted to or whatever. Each one holds, they tell you where they hold it. So I think some are at BitGo. I think most are Coinbase. Fidelity, I think, has their own model. And, all of them are kind of competing, and the chances of them losing are not zero, right? But the thing is, like I said, as insurance products come out.
Secure your retirement with a Bitcoin IRA from Unchained. Right now, get started with no setup fees and enjoy your first year free. You can open a Roth and traditional Bitcoin IRA and even upgrade old forgotten 401ks and IRAs into tax-advantaged Bitcoin where you control the keys. Get started today at unchained.com/frontier. There's no better way to hold tax-advantaged Bitcoin for decades. That's unchained.com/frontier. And now back to the show.
There may be this beautiful thing where all of these individual entities are insuring the coins that they hold, so that if they lose them for, I don't know exactly which reasons it could be, but like not like if someone takes their coins, if they're hacked, they're insured. So, I think that there's a world in which all of a sudden you can insure your own coins, they can insure their coins. You can have some relative guarantees about the coins that you're buying. And I think that's really interesting. The guarantees are obviously in fiat, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I guess, that's super interesting. I also want to hear more about the Bitcoin Uncensored, the podcast that you co-hosted back in the day.
Sure.
What do you think about like the current state of Bitcoin podcasts? Like it feels like there's been so many different Bitcoin podcasts over time. People joke that like everyone has started a Bitcoin podcast. What do you think about everything that's gone on over the years?
I always thought Bitcoin Uncensored was fun because mainly it was me and Chris just recording the conversations that we already had and then just putting a microphone in front of us. And then it became popular because it was funny. And I guess I would say that the majority of the podcasts I listen to in Bitcoin aren't that funny. So like, I don't know. If you're looking for good information on how, OpCat works, Bitcoin podcasts right now are in a pretty good place. If you're looking for good information on how OpCat works and fart jokes, you're not going to find a lot of restaurants for that, if you will. There aren't a lot of hot dog stands selling that product. So, it depends. The podcast scene right now is highly informative. One of the things that I really hate about the podcast circuit is that you end up with these people like Matt Corral is pretty guilty of this. When they have a project, they go around and they do like 13 interviews and it's the same goddamn fucking interview all the time. Again and again and again. They give 37 of the same interviews. And then you ask them when they're not, hawking a project to come on and they just refuse. They won't do it because it's not like they don't have anything to talk about, even if you just wanted to have them on for fun. So I find that to be pretty shitty. I think Bitcoin podcasts should, this recommendation, even running one, don't bring those people on your show. Like, unless they're willing to come on at other times, they're basically their marketing arm, and that's not that interesting. They should, unless they want to pay you, charge them with Bitcoin.
Fair enough. I haven't accepted payments for anyone on the Unchained podcast.
Yeah. I don't know. The Bitcoin podcast ecosystem it's always been pretty boring, with the exception, I think, of Bitcoin Uncensored. It's always been a pretty dry. Look, we're talking about like Cash Money. And like could you imagine a dollar bill podcast?
Yeah, not really.
It's a pretty hard like road to toe when you're talking about Cash Money. So like either you do something a little different, or you end up reverting to like, what is Bitcoin technically? And then the other thing that a lot of them will devolve into is like libertarian conspiracyville. which isn't that interesting either. You know, I imagine that in the modern era, a lot of them would have probably been highly political, particularly after like wokeism came. Bitcoin Uncensored had its political moments, but they were pretty neutral. Like we called ourselves trans women on the podcast long before anyone had ever cared about trans people. And, it was just, the whole thing was a joke on what became known as the woke ideology. We front ran it by about 4 years, 4 years. So I find that interesting. I think it's hard to be innovative, an innovative thinker apart from being humorous. If you're not very funny, like, because humor, I think, is derived in these sort of like truths that maybe you haven't even thought of yet. And so I think it's hard to do a podcast that isn't funny and is very interesting. That said, people are very hungry for Bitcoin content. So any Bitcoin podcast, it's like highly informative, people are listening to. I don't know much about what else there is out there. I don't listen to a ton of Bitcoin podcasts.
Yeah, that's fair. I feel like a lot of like Bitcoin OGs, quote unquote, like, you've kind of heard everything at this point. It's like, it's more for the newer people that are, still learning about it.
I don't know. There's a lot of things. Bitcoin's got a lot of new things, and there's new controversies that are cropping up. Like the OpCat conversation's a good one, right? That one's been, what was the big fix last time that we did?
Like Taproot.
Taproot was a huge controversy. NFTs have been a huge controversy. NFTs on Bitcoin, so there's plenty of things to sort of keep abreast of. But I think people will say like touch grass. In my world, I have a strong preference. Like, I understand how Bitcoin works. At least I've understood how it worked so far. I don't know that this is how it will work forever, but we've had a pump, like a major pump every 4 years, and then it goes into stasis, and then it pumps again, and then it goes into stasis, and then it pumps again. If you live your life in these sort of troughs waiting for the pump, you're living your life as sort of a purgatorial prisoner. And I'd rather go to like the Grand Canyon or like outside and like mow the lawn than watch that. Bitcoin's going to do whatever it does. And I don't really like watch a lot of Bitcoin podcasts for that reason. I'm trying to do other things and think about other things because, as Bitcoin does its thing, you can either choose to like just sit there on your ass until you're rich, or you can go do stuff and live your life and have a lot more experiences and get rich. I think those things are available to you. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners will choose the sitting, like I said, the purgatorial prison where you're sitting there just kind of waiting in a stadium with other Bitcoiners until the guys at the top are rich enough to leave, and then you're stuck there waiting for your moment. It's kind of like that. Like everyone's like in line and you're just kind of waiting until your cohort of like new Bitcoin entrants is rich. And then you get up and leave purgatory. And that's what's happened. Bruce Fenton, for example, has long left purgatory. And like a lot of these characters that we followed on our like Bitcoin podcast have long left purgatory and are now like, living in castles in Connecticut and whatnot, or in Argentina, as Mircea Popescu did.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I guess, do you think that's kind of related to like the turnover in general? Because I think another thing that's kind of interesting about just the Bitcoin industry, over the last 15 years or whatever, is like companies come and go. Like, I think like Coinbase and Kraken may be like two successful companies that, have outperformed Bitcoin over a very long time. But like a lot of companies just kind of churn and die and then something else replaces them. What do you think about all that?
I think that money management is really hard. And when your money is volatile, it's even harder. I guess that gets into like Junseth's advice on managing your company if you're starting a Bitcoin company. And Bitcoiners hate my advice because it's counterintuitive to all of them and they disagree with me, but I'm right. Never hold your treasuries in Bitcoin. Do your business in fiat. That's like, otherwise you will fail. I promise you. And if you don't, you got lucky. So, like that's been a strong recommendation that I make, in any business. If you're running a business, if you want to buy Bitcoin, take a distribution and buy it in your own portfolio. There might be an exception here with Michael Saylor where he's figured out an infinite money rule. That's a very different thing. he understood something that maybe no one else understood. And so he's running a strategy with Bitcoin, which is a really interesting thing to do. But he seems to fully understand the strategy he's running. And it's a really weird infinite money glitch. And I'm kind of wondering if the reason that he knows how to do this is because he's been in the market so long and has just kind of figured this out. Like, it almost seems like this occurred. The way that I would say Saylor appears to me is that he was sitting in his bed one night and had this idea and is like, I have an infinite money glitch. I wonder if this will work. And then the next day he announced something and tried it, and then it worked. And then that's kind of how I think of, that's I think the difference between MSTR and a lot of these other companies is that he's running a Bitcoin strategy on Bitcoin, whereas a lot of these companies are doing businesses and then they're holding their treasuries in Bitcoin. And the result is they run out of cash, particularly in bear markets. And that's real dangerous.
Yeah. What do you think about MicroStrategy? Is this infinite money glitch going to be sustainable?
I don't know. I don't understand it. I've never really bothered to. I have a feeling it's a pretty simple thing to understand if I wanted to understand it. But it's just I'm watching him do this infinite money glitch and he keeps doing it and the price of MSTR goes up. And I keep wondering if everybody knows something that I don't. But it's the kind of thing, it's sort of like he said it. Michael Saylor said this one thing, which is correct, which is that the first company that prints money to buy Bitcoin wins. I think that's probably true. And it's also true. The reason I think that he comes to that conclusion before most people is because he understood that the first company that uses printed money, that prints their own money, if you will. And by the way, money printing is done by everyone. This is why libertarians are so funny to me, because you can pick whatever currency you want, right? Because currency, at least in the fiat sense, is debt. So if you want, you can be in United States debt holding dollars. Or if you want, you can buy bonds in Goldman Sachs and you can be in Goldman Sachs dollars. Incidentally, libertarians still pick US dollars, right? So you have a choice of thousands and thousands of what you might call currencies or currency equivalents by going into bonds, right? And essentially MSTR is doing exactly the same thing. They've realized, I think Saylor understood this. So MSTR bucks are essentially Bitcoin of some sort. And so if you really want to buy, if you believe what many people believe, you can buy essentially MSTR bonds, if you will, or I guess invest in the company and gain profits from the strategy. But there's MSTR is interesting, an infinite money glitch until it isn't, and I don't know. I personally don't own it because I don't know why. I own a little, but like de minimis numbers of shares that are kind of left over. And I don't have any idea. I really don't understand the strategy. It intellectually, I think I probably could easily if I spent some time. But it's interesting to me that Saylor's the first one to have thought of this, and he's executing it really, really well with a high market cap company. And he's done it really well, even though he started buying, if you think about it, at the top of last market cycle, which is phenomenal. He's had a lot of conviction. That's rare in Bitcoin. Most companies that buy at the top, at the bottom, we end up with an announcement that they're dropping Bitcoin. So it's PayPal early on, 5 times, and I think Newegg and lots and lots of other companies that were trying Bitcoin stuff.
Do you think we'll see other large companies adopt a similar strategy? I feel like in 2020, when they initially announced that they were going to start doing this, at least to a small scale, people were like, oh my gosh, Apple's right around the corner. They're going to adopt a Bitcoin standard and make Bitcoin their primary treasury reserve asset. And then obviously that has not happened 4 years later. Is it ever going to happen, or what do you think?
It depends on if his strategy is replicable. And I bet it is. But the thing is, if you think about how Bitcoin works, there's not another 200,000 Bitcoins sitting open on the market in the same way that there was when he started buying. And so there's only enough room in this space for a certain number of companies to do it at a high level. And you could get your hands on 200,000 Bitcoins with some trouble, but it'll push the price up significantly. So I don't know. I mean, I think if we believe that capitalism works, and I do, it means that there's a lot of companies watching Michael and his company, and there's an awful lot of companies that are thinking about the possibility of being the second company to do this. And And if there's a second company, there's a lot of companies that are going to start very, very quickly thinking about being the third. And I don't mean like these little companies that are doing it with like no market cap. I mean, like Michael Saylor's got a very large market cap. A lot of people use his software, or at least did at one time. And he's not like a little piddly player. He's not really that big, but he's not really, well, he is now. It's getting bigger. But he wasn't that big when they started. So it was kind of a throw caution to the wind. And it's a little bit weird because corporations are set up as like risk, as sort of like these pools of risk for specific given activities. So if you're Amazon, your risk pool is primarily like tied to AWS and expanding that, and frankly using Amazon as a sort of the nuclear power of AWS. It kind of takes up the most space and resources from AWS, and then they expand on top of that to give everybody else power or give everybody else space on their servers, right? So that way they have like sort of a minimum amount of space that's always taken up. And then the result is that they have, frankly, the most robust architecture of anybody for a website, which is why Amazon is such a great site. But every company has these sort of risk pools. MSTRs was in the software space. I think they realized that they were kind of, I don't think they're a highly used software at this point. They're used by like a number of people, but they kind of needed to remake themselves. So it was a good opportunity for them to do that. But there's a lot of companies that are, the idea is that like when you invest in Apple, your thought is that Apple's going to take your money or the money that they generate in the future and put that towards their core competency and then generate more revenues. That's how companies work. So it's hard for me, unless there's companies with like tons of free cash, to think of a company that would like do this, unless they just have a ton of free cash and they don't have anything else to do and they just start running it with like a de minimis amount of money in their free cash as an experiment. But we'll see. I mean, like someone's going to be the second company to do it 100% if it works.
Yeah, it's also like just interesting to think about it as like, over the last week or so, Bitcoin has just been price wise, like absolutely, soaring. And still like no single company in the S&P 500 has like really even copied MicroStrategy to some extent. It's still like, from what I've seen, like in traditional finance, like kind of taboo or weird to even talk about Bitcoin. Like the ETFs have like kind of changed things, but people will still kind of laugh at you sometimes if you just like bring up Bitcoin. And so like, it just seems like the price is like relatively high, but it feels potentially like still very early.
Yeah, the normies haven't gotten here yet. It's still just us kind of watching price go up right now. Feels a little lonely in the stadium. Usually, Bert the mechanic joins us at some point, and like your taxi driver joins us, and you're, going somewhere like, I'm hearing about Bitcoin, and they'll ask you questions. Yeah, there's if this is an actual cycle, like I don't like to talk about cycles because I don't know that I believe in them, but it's hard with Bitcoin because it just continues to be a cyclical asset for whatever reason. But if this is, what we would call a cycle, it's early, it's just at the very beginning. And we're waiting for the FOMO. We're waiting for your mom to call you and ask you how she buys Bitcoin. And that hasn't happened yet because it's gone up phenomenally in the last few weeks and months.
Yeah. Watching like, Bitcoin over the years, like what do you think drives the price of Bitcoin? Because like some people will say, oh, it's the halvings that create like this natural scarcity. And like, kind of like you said, there's not 200,000 Bitcoin for you to buy like right now. If you try to do that, the price is going to soar. Or is it more like the demand side of things? Like people just have more money and they're like, what do I do with this money? And they happen to buy Bitcoin. What do you think?
Kind of wish I knew. I really don't know. I never speculate about that because I just don't know. I think my belief about Bitcoin is that it's really the world's first money. Nothing like it has existed before this. I would say we've had facsimiles of money. And I think that Bitcoin is more like money than anything else, theoretically. And that we've only theoretically ever understood money. And it's the first time that we can actually study it. So that's kind of how I feel about Bitcoin. Whether that's true or not, or whether that's hyperbole, I guess we'll see in the future. But people do need Bitcoin. It's a thing people need. And as people need it, more people get in. My presumption has always been that Bitcoin had high utility somewhere and in some places. And I don't understand why it goes up suddenly and runs into these cycles. It doesn't make any sense to me. I hope someday we have an explanation. I don't know what causes them. Like, I don't know. Maybe Donald Trump got in, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to think, like, obviously whether we're right or we're wrong, this is probably going to be something that will be studied by, people in college or academics for a very long time, I would imagine.
I mean, we're getting into a deeper market. I mean, I was in a conversation yesterday. We were talking about how Bitcoin is, I think, past the market cap of silver officially, and like that's astounding. That's an amazing achievement. And I remember early on we would talk about the theoretical day in the future where Bitcoin would surpass the precious metals, and I think it felt sort of distant and ethereal, and to watch the sort of reification of those dreams, I'm kind of put aside. Like, I'm amazed that I get to see it. I'm amazed at the accuracy of the predictions. I'm amazed at the speed of adoption. I think generally this type of thing sits in obscurity for a century before people really understand what they're looking at. And that's not the case with Bitcoin. I don't really understand how it is that it caught on, apart from maybe it just being that useful. And I think I think people don't realize that it didn't have to. It didn't have to catch on. And I think I'm always amazed at, I guess what I feel a little bit like is divine providence in some sense, that has sort of taken this thing and like turned it into what it is. I'm amazed at where Bitcoin is today compared to where I thought it would have been. If you'd asked me when I first got here how long it would take for Bitcoin to become something, or for any of those dreams to have been achieved, I probably would have told you 50 to 100 years. And here we are 13 years later.
I agree. It is pretty amazing how far Bitcoin is already. Kind of tying this back to where we were talking about, what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, like
Sure.
the transition from libertarian or anarchism to like just kind of more everyday political view. The recent talk is the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. Trump getting elected, Senator Cynthia Lummis talking about this. What do you think about that? Like, is it going to happen? Will it not happen? Is it a big deal? Is it not a big deal?
We'll see. Trump has a majority in Congress, in both houses. So like anything that he wants to do is certainly feasible and possible. Whether they do it or not, I don't know. I do think they have a shot. And I don't know that it's a good thing in the long term, but I do think it's an interesting prospect in the short term. I think that the government acquiring or holding that much Bitcoin off the markets is really interesting. We know what that's like with gold. When the governments get their grubby hands in it, it is essentially off the market in full. And that's an interesting prospect for Bitcoin to have hundreds of thousands of coins simply not coming onto the market.
What's your concern like long term then?
Well, aren't Bitcoiners obsessed with the fact that the government confiscated gold? I mean, the reason they confiscated gold is because gold is a reserve asset. Gold wouldn't have been confiscated if it weren't a reserve asset. And then as soon as gold was no longer a reserve asset, what did countries do? You end up with the Kruger end. They're making 1 ounce gold coins. They're selling it to people around the world. Those become so profitable. And the apartheid in South Africa makes people not want to buy South African goods. So in the boycott of the apartheid, Canada gets in on the grift and starts making 1 ounce gold coins. And in the wake of Canada starting to make these things, the Canadian maple, then America and a bunch of other companies start making their own 1 ounce gold coins. And the primary buyer of 1 ounce gold coins are libertarians. And that's all. I mean, all that stuff is it's their confiscated gold, So it's interesting to me that they would look at that as an example, and that people would look at Saifedean's book as this like great call to arms in a sense. We've seen what happens when a country makes a limited supply item its reserve. They often mismanage it, go bankrupt, or nearly bankrupt, and then have to call it back. And so if you don't want your Bitcoin confiscated, or for there to be any risk of confiscation, it's not actually something you should want. On the other hand, like in the short term, it's going to make a lot of Bitcoiners very rich. It also might work in exactly the way that, like, Trump and Loomis think it will. The problem is that we live in a two-party system, and after the Republicans, let's say they manage it really well, you get a bunch of Democrats at some point managing this. And I don't know. I mean, like, you might have a Republican who's an idiot who mismanaged, but like the point is that there's no reason that this supply or the stash has to be managed well. Government has a history of mismanaging anything it gets its hands on. So that seems to me to be a little problematic, and that does make me worry about exactly what, how this would work. I don't know the mechanics of it in any way, but I think he might get it. He might.
Yeah. I tend to agree with kind of what you just said. Like, it seems like a lot of people are not even really necessarily going to care. Like, if this actually does happen, I think a lot of Bitcoiners will probably cheer and be happy for the number go up, and they'll kind of lose sight of maybe what they wanted all along, or I don't know.
It goes back to what your reason for investing in Bitcoin is. Like I said, like, if you're afraid of the government confiscating your wealth, which I'm told by a lot of libertarians that they are, then you probably don't want to create situations where the government demands that you give up your Bitcoin. And that's a great way to do it.
Two more questions and we can start to close it out. What's something that you believe that most Bitcoiners would disagree with?
I call myself a Keynesian. No.
Fair enough.
I don't. What things that I believe that most Bitcoiners don't. I don't think the world is going to collapse. I think that libertarians and Bitcoiners in general have this thesis of the world where like they are Joshua, and the United States or any sort of hegemonic institution or country is Jericho, and they're just walking around it with their Bitcoin, and at some point they're going to blow their shofars and the walls will come tumbling down and they'll take over the city and also take the seat of power, as every political force wants to do. And the Bitcoiners will just govern into paradise. And that's not how states collapse. The way states collapse is there's a collapse, and then there's very quickly a new leader. And then, like, currencies don't just disappear in a collapse. They remake them. They reissue something new. They have you turn it in at the bank. I was born in Brazil in the 80s. I lived through as a baby, which I remember well. But I remember in Brazil, like, there were just tons and tons of currency collapses, and I've watched these and witnessed them, and I know how they go, at least from the perspective of a young child. And they don't collapse the way that libertarians think they do. It's not that the dollar is here one day and then day two it's collapsed and then it's no longer there. It's kind of a fast process where currencies collapse and then the government quickly decides to replace them. And that's kind of what happened with the U.S. and the depegging from gold. In a sense, it was suddenly announced, and then suddenly we had the silver window, and then it was what it was from then on. And no one really noticed what you might have called a currency collapse, because we at that point basically had a different way of managing and having dollars. But in spite of that, we still have the dollar today. It's still the strongest asset in the world. And that's the case with a lot of this stuff, is like these currencies don't just disappear. So I think libertarians have a lot of very bad beliefs when it comes to sort of the way in which their fantasy is played out, where the world exists in one state and then the next day they wake up and suddenly they're the kings of the earth because they hoarded all the gold, like Smog the dragon. And I don't think that's how that plays out. So I think that's unpopular in Bitcoin, for one.
Do you have another idea?
Well, you asked for two. I'm trying to think of another one. I mean, obviously my views on government aren't so bad. I don't have, here's one. I don't know that I believe in hyper Bitcoinization the way that people think about it. I think that there's this sort of belief that Bitcoin flattens borders and that countries kind of cease to exist in a Bitcoin world, as hyper Bitcoinization unites us all in this one world currency that we can all agree on. And because we can agree on it, it ends wars and conflicts, and governments accede to the people. and cease to basically exist, because they're all governments will be run on behalf of and by the power of the people, and everyone's rights will be restored. I don't tend to believe that. I don't think that. I think that there's evil in the world. I think there's evil people. I think there are evil governments. I think in a Bitcoin world, presuming that Bitcoin ever hyper Bitcoinizes in the way that people say, in a Bitcoin world, there's just literally the same number of evil people doing the same evil things. And I don't think that Bitcoin stops wars. I don't think that it prevents debt. I don't think that it prevents any of the things that Bitcoiners think it does. I do think it's better money. And I think that you need to divorce your ideology from what it means to have better money, because there are ideologies like sort of Misenism, or Austrian economics, as people would generally have called it, like that notionally believe that when you have a better money, the world becomes a better place. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think when you have better money, the world becomes a little bit more efficient. And I think all efficiencies inure to the benefit of the world, but are almost always incremental. So we're not going to see the world become 1,000,000% more efficient with better money. We're going to see it become 1% more efficient or 2%, which, if you think on the long history span of history, you're talking a doubling of world wealth, a faster doubling of world wealth by 18 years as a result of that 2% efficiency, right? Or 36 years. So like if it, you're just a 2% increase in efficiency would increase basically double the amount of growth, whether it's economic or intellectual or whatever the case may be, by 36 years. And so that means, every 100 years, every century, you'll have 3x more growth in all areas of life with the 2% increase. So it's a huge amount of efficiency improvement, but I don't think anything adds the sort of like divine efficiency that people believe Bitcoin is going to add to the world. I think it's going to just be nominally more efficient, and it will hugely improve our lives, but very slowly.
Yeah, very.
So that's the second belief I have.
Yeah,
very unpopular.
Cool.
And third belief, yeah. I also believe that Peter Todd is Satoshi.
Actually, or no?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. Last question, then we can really close it out. What do you think is the biggest risk to Bitcoin?
I think the biggest risk to Bitcoin is ideology. Always ideology. I think wokeism presented a huge threat to Bitcoin. I'm hoping that that's on its way out now. But I think ideological developers can really destroy everything that's been built here. And I think Bitcoin Core needs to guard against ideological development in all its forms, and remain completely neutral. I said during the woke revolution shit that the best way to know if your software has been taken over by wokies, what is it, the wokey cry? If you want to know if your software has been taken over by wokies, just let me see whether you changed your name from blacklist to a lol list or whatever, and or block list. And if you did that, you are ideologically captured. And so like Bitcoin did do that. And I think that they need to change it back. I think ideology in all of its forms needs to be rejected, that Bitcoin needs to be totally neutral. And I'm glad, I think Bitcoin in some ways sort of reflects America. And I think that like right now I'm full of hope because of what we just did in the US, electing Donald Trump in the wake of like what I think was really a problematic set of years. But that's America was designed in a way where we would coup our king every 4 years, or are given the option to coup the king. And then if the king in the 1920s, they changed the rules, and if the king has not been couped 2 times in a row, we put him out to pasture and let him eat grass on a nice mansion based field. So we coup our king every 4 years, and that allows the system to self-correct, or it's supposed to allow the system to self-correct. So I think Bitcoin's kind of similar in that, because of the way that Bitcoin works, you are in constant fight as the core development team to remain the most relevant core development group. And you could lose that at any time. So if you add ideology to the mix, there's no reason that you're not going to end up like sort of a team fork fight. And so I think the beauty of Bitcoin is, while there are these threat vectors, ideology being what I think is the most problematic of them, I think the system of Bitcoin and the ability to vote through picking software is this remarkable mechanism that reflects America's ability to self-correct. I think Bitcoin has another interesting method of by which it can self-correct, and I think that's really remarkable. Self-correcting money is a property of money that I didn't know we needed, but it obviously is, because there's like properties that people like Misans will say money has to have. I think they're missing one, and one of them is that it has to be digital. I don't think money can be anything but digital. And number two, I think it has to have a self-correction mechanism, because it has to be free from ideology, and so at least as much as it can be. And when ideologies become problematic, it needs to be able to correct. So that's I think what's cool about Bitcoin is that it does have that mechanism. Also, that is the biggest threat to ideology.
Yeah, I think that was very well said. Well, Junseth, thanks so much for taking the time to do this. Congrats again on the recent child that you just had.
Yeah.
Thanks again. This is awesome.
I enjoyed it. I hope it was, it's not as funny as it often is, but I thought it was a good combo. I haven't had one of these in a while.
But thanks again. This is great.
All right. Love you all.